Hi everyone, I'm Felix, co-founder and CEO at ADP List, and we're on a mission to help every person unlock their human potential by bringing shared knowledge and inspiration to the world. Today I have a really special guest with me, and if I might say, he's been an idol for myself and quite a lot of my friends and even my team for some time now. We have Guy Kawasaki, who is the chief evangelist at Canva, the author of Think Remarkable, the host of Remarkable People podcast. He was also the chief evangelist of Apple. He was part of the original team who was responsible to market the Macintosh computer. He's a trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation. He has written over 16 books, including The Art of the Start 2.0, The Art of Social Media, Enchantment, and others. He's also a very known figure as the father of modern evangelism and one of the most important figures in marketing. So let's put our hand together and welcome Guy Kawasaki.
Oh, thank
Guy?
you very much. You're giving me way too much credit. I'm telling you. There was Jesus before me. Okay, just
Well, there's always a time before Guy Kawasaki. That's what they say.
there
So
was a 2,000 year gap though. But yeah, there was Jesus first.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the interview, Guy. And there's thousands of people watching right now
Wow.
on our
I'm
live
sorry.
stream.
I'm 7 minutes
So,
late. It was my fault. I haven't been using a Macintosh too long, so I got to figure some
yeah.
stuff out now.
Well, Mac always wins. Hopefully, I'm not offending people who are using Windows. But Guy, before we start today's conversation, I obviously want everyone to know about you. Majority of our audience are designers, they are product builders, which I think is relevant to the past work that you've done and the current work. But I want everyone today to also know and start this conversation to know you as a human being. And I think that's fundamentally important for us to understand you. While we're doing this interview, while we're sort of doing the research about you, I've come to find out that you lost your hearing about a year and a half ago. You lost your hearing, and
Yes.
and you now rely on transcriptions and whatnot. How has life changed for you since then? How has the world changed for you since then?
Yeah, so I have something called Meniere's disease, and Meniere's disease has three symptoms. It's hearing loss, tinnitus, it's just a ringing in your ear, and also vertigo. So the major symptoms right now are hearing loss and tinnitus. And tinnitus, you can't do anything about it. Hearing loss. So I am deaf on this side. I've probably lost 50% on this side. So that was about 2 years ago where I was in that state. And, I mean, listen, there are much worse things than being deaf, like, pancreatic cancer, for example, right? So, I'm sure Steve Jobs would rather be deaf than dead, right? And so,
Yeah.
if you had to lose one sense, I probably think losing your hearing is the best of the worst, and
Wow.
because nobody ever died from losing their hearing. And about a year and a half ago, after this, I got a cochlear implant. So I have a cochlear implant on this side. And what a cochlear implant does is it bypasses the hearing cells in your inner ear. And there's a microphone that's connected to the auditory nerve. And so it goes straight. It skips my ear because my ear is not functional. So right now I'm listening to you, and your audio comes straight into my head without any sound waves. So
Wow.
it takes you, cochlear implant is a miracle, and it takes you from being deaf to having lousy hearing. It doesn't take you from being deaf to good hearing, but I'm telling you, to go from deaf to lousy, yeah, I'm thankful for that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Guy. And it's so powerful to have so much positivity, in the way that you look at life, in the way that you
Well,
look at,
well, I'll
every
give you I'll give
situation.
you an
Yeah.
insight into this. Okay, so
Go
I
for
have
it.
this podcast called Remarkable People, and I
Yeah.
have interviewed people. I'll give you some examples. sentenced to 40 years imprisonment at 16 for being accomplice to a murder. And, after 22 years, he gets out and he becomes an artist. Another person on my podcast had two parents. They were living in the Brooklyn projects, and both parents were crack addicts. So the crack addict parents would steal from them. Another was homeless, his whole youth. Another caught ALS, and she has lived 10 years with ALS. The usual life expectancy of ALS, which is a lethal, non-curable disease, is 2 years. So she's outlived the predictions by 8 years. And so I look at this ALS person, I look at this homeless person, I look at this person with crack addict parents, I look at this person who spent 22 years in prison. And I say to myself, Guy, you are one lucky son of a bitch, because all you have is deafness. I mean, deafness is nothing compared to what they go through.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It really brings so much, perspective into life. And I think this is exactly why we're doing this conversation today. We found out a couple of months ago that, we really wanted very honest, raw, life stories that people could learn, and not just technical skill sets about marketing or about design. And this is exactly, I think, such a good start to today's interview. But I want to, go back to a little bit about yourself and also your life, and especially, I think, the early days of your life. I know that, based on obviously what we've read online, you were born in Hawaii, Honolulu in 1954. And your family actually lived through a very tough part of the history in Honolulu called the Kalihi Valley. You guys weren't very rich, and obviously, but then the most powerful thing that I found out was that you never felt poor because your parents made sacrifices. Your mother was a housewife. Your dad was a fireman, real estate broker, state senator.
Jeez, you know me better than I know myself.
So we do our research. Our team do the research, and kudos to Kash on that. So you obviously lived through a part of life where, I'm 27 and I could never imagine, the periods of that time. Could you tell us how was growing up like for you? Can you describe the environment in which you grew up in?
Okay, let me be honest about this too. So yeah, I come from a lower middle class family in Kalihi Valley in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I mean, you'd have to be familiar with Hawaii to understand what it means to come from Kalihi Valley. But I don't want to paint a picture that I had to overcome just crushing poverty, that, that we didn't have enough food, we had no clothes, we had nothing, we were suffering. And it's not like my parents were dropped in the middle of Hawaii with one suitcase and, we were homeless. So, don't exaggerate how difficult my life was. And I'm telling you, when I look back, I never realized that, we were in a lower middle class family. I mean, I was happy. I had clothes. I had a very happy youth. So I didn't overcome anything in my youth. I don't have one of these great Horatio Algier overcoming crushing poverty, medical, crime, whatever like that. I just had a lower middle class family upbringing, and my parents, you were right, made many sacrifices so that I could go to a private school that was college prep. And that led to me getting into Stanford. And then Stanford is kind of where I think my life took a big change, because not because of the academics, because I found the easiest major. And it's not like I became a computer scientist or doctor or lawyer. In fact, I went to law school and dropped out after 2 weeks. So, it's because of my parents and their emphasis on education that I am where I am.
Wow. And you talk a little bit about dropping out from law school. And by the way, I haven't really.
Yeah, well, so this is the 1970s. And at that time, if you're Asian American, and maybe that's still true today, your parents wanted you to either be a doctor, lawyer, or dentist. So the first path I took, because I was in this Asian American dorm where everybody was a pre-med, I said, I'll be a pre-med. So I go and take this course where you walk around the Stanford Hospital. on rounds with a doctor. And the first day I fainted and I said, yeah, I don't think you're going to be a doctor, guy. And then I thought, geez, guy, do you want to stick your hand in people's mouths the rest of your life? And then I heard this research that dentists have the highest rate of suicide. I said, okay, so that eliminates dentistry and medical. So now what's left is law. And my father was a state senator at that point in Hawaii, and he had never gone to college, much less law school. So he wanted me to go to law school. So I did it for them. And then I just hated it. I mean, I was like, I don't know. I just could not stand law school. And this is after 2 weeks. Maybe maybe I didn't show enough grit, which is, I divide my book into 3 parts: growth, grit, and grace. So probably at that point, I didn't have enough grit in me. So I dropped out after 2 weeks. And I got to tell you, I've never regretted it. But yeah, I dropped out of law school after 2 weeks.
Well, like, talking about greed, I mean, sometimes greed could also means walking away from things that are not right from you and pursuing things that, kind of following your heart a little bit on that. And it's so interesting because, you grew up in sort of Hawaii and then you go to Stanford. But I'm so curious because I'm not from someone from Hawaii. I'm sure, there are some people on this call from Hawaii, but majority might not be. Can you share sort of what do you take away from the place that you grew up in? How has that shaped your worldview or sort of like your life as well in that place that you grew up? Yeah.
Growing up in Hawaii definitely has a huge influence on like how you think, because it is very racially diverse, right? I mean, it's not like you're growing up in the middle of America. This is a very different place. And I also will tell you that the point I was growing up, Japanese Americans were kind of controlling Hawaii. So I didn't have this same experience of many Japanese Americans born on the mainland, because Japanese Americans born on the mainland, they had this very traumatic experience of being interned during World War II. And my parents, none of my relatives were interned because we were in Hawaii. So that's a fundamental difference between me and most Japanese Americans. And I think, Hawaii has this real kind of aloha spirit, and it also has what's called the ohana. And ohana is literally the word for family, but the way it's used in Hawaii, it's an extended family. So it's not just who you're blood related to. It's all the uncles and the aunties and the coaches and the teachers who are part of your ohana. It's basically anybody who cares for you and wants you to be successful. That's your ohana. And it can be people that are not at all related to you by blood. And those kind of things really, really like influenced me a lot. And so now it's like it sounds like it's all just, just great. But I'll tell you one thing about Hawaii that is maybe not negative, but it's not the most positive, which is that your horizons become a little restricted, right? That in Hawaii at the time, if you were really successful, you ran a retail store, you ran a hotel, you were a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist. And then I come to the mainland and I say, holy cow, there's Hewlett, there's Packard, there's National Semiconductor. I mean, it's like a whole different world coming from Hawaii to the mainland. And that really changed my perspective in life.
Wow. And did you feel like, coming to the mainland, it was almost like the world just isn't as sort of pure as you might think it is, with growing up in a sort of like in a place where everyone treats each other like family. Out here is almost like a wild, wild west. Was that a culture shock? How did you adapt to that? And I asked this question.
Honestly, it was not a culture shock. When I arrived on the mainland and I went to Stanford, man, I was happy from the day I landed. I mean, it was like, holy shit, man, this is a whole new world here. It's not an island, man. You can you can drive for days, and there's so much economic opportunity. There's such, it's like a whole different world. It was like my blinders were removed about what I could be and what I could do. It was I loved the mainland. I was like, I have arrived, baby. I'm in my place I should be.
Wow, that is incredible. And obviously, from there on, you kind of thrive in your career, and you obviously work for really really amazing companies like Apple, and then sort of like now Canva. But I want to talk a little bit about your career. You spend some time with Apple, which I think that's something that you're most famously known for. But looking back at your career from from where you're at today, what are some of the most pivotal moments for you? I mean, that this is something that I could never really find in my research, but I was kind of wonder from
Well,
your words, where do you think was pivotal for you?
in a commencement address for Stanford, Steve Jobs said that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. Okay.
Yeah.
And I am living testimony to that. So let's start in Hawaii, and I'll take you from Hawaii. Now, my book, Think Remarkable, it has a foreword by Jane Goodall. And, if you wanted to have a foreword in your book, there are few people in the world you would want more than Jane Goodall, right? I mean, she may be the most remarkable person alive.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you this whole story of how from Kalihi Valley, I got Jane Goodall into my book, and it illustrates a lot of things. Okay.
Please.
So as you already know, I was raised in this lower middle class part of Hawaii called Kalihi Valley, and I was going to an elementary school. And my sixth grade teacher tells my parents, your son has too much potential. You got to get him out of this public school system, put him in the private school system, get him in a college prep system so that he goes to college. He has that much potential. So thank you, God, my parents listened to him. Thank you, God, my parents made the sacrifice. So I get into this school called Iolani in Hawaii. Iolani, somehow, somewhere, I don't know, somebody told me to apply to Stanford, and God knows, I don't know how I got in because I could not get into there. So I get into Stanford. Now, before I go to Stanford, I have to tell you a few stories. So I lived in Kalihi Valley, and Iolani is on the other side of town, geographically and financially and like mentally. It's on the other side of town. And so I need to catch public transportation to go to school. I need to catch the bus. And twice in my high school, I was robbed on the bus. Like,
Wow.
a bigger guy just said, give me your money, right? And also a third thing that happened in high school is that a friend of a family gave me a ride in his Porsche 911. So now this is going to figure importantly. So I get this ride in this Porsche. I said, holy shit, man, this is like, wow, this is how rich people live. I got to get a car like this. And guy, the only way you're going to do this is you got to study and you got to work your ass off. So, okay, now I'm at Stanford, and I love cars. And I meet this guy from Arizona, and the difference between him and me is that he loves cars like I do, but he has these cars. I only want these cars, right? So I got to tell you, once I went home with him for, I think, Thanksgiving or something, and his father picks us up in a Rolls Royce, and my head is exploding, Kalihi Valley. Now I'm riding in a Rolls Royce. And one night we go out to dinner, and his mother asked me to drive her home in her car because she's tired. And her car is a Ferrari Daytona. So now I've ridden in a Rolls Royce, a Porsche 911, and a Ferrari Daytona. And I said, guy, man, this is why you need to study. So, I predict that you'll have guests, or maybe you've already had guests like this, and they're going to tell you, yeah, I was motivated in my youth by wanting to change the world, make the world a better place, ensure education, ensure, meritocracy, ensure financial success. I'm telling you, all I wanted to do was not change the world. I just wanted to change the car. Okay. So now I'm at Stanford, and I meet this guy, and we become best friends because of our love for cars. Fast forward a few years from that, he's now working in the Macintosh division, and he calls me up. He says, Guy, we got this job. I want you to interview. So I interview for this job. I didn't get that job, but then he calls me up again, and he says, we got another job. And I interview for that job, and I get that job. So I was the second software evangelist in the Macintosh division of Apple. And our job was to convince people to write Mac software and create Mac hardware. So obviously I succeeded in that job. I became pretty visible. So now fast forward a few more years. And this woman who is the executive director of TEDx Palo Alto sends me an email that says, Jane Goodall has agreed to be on stage at TEDx Palo Alto. I want you to interview her. I said, oh yeah, like sign me up. I'll do that. Absolutely. I'll cancel whatever else I had. I will interview Jane Goodall for you. Now, the only reason why she contacted me is not because I knew her. It's because she knew of me because of my work at Apple. Right. I didn't know the executive director. She knew of me. We had a mutual friend. So now I interviewed Jane Goodall and we become friends. She was the first guest on my podcast. And, you know, once you get Jane Goodall on your podcast, everything else is easy because you tell every other prospective guest. I had Jane Goodall. I mean, if you think you're as remarkable as Jane Goodall, you probably should say yes. And nobody ever says no. So anyway. Yeah. So now, then I'm writing this book and I asked Jane Goodall to write the foreword and she agrees. So I'm telling you this whole long story because it starts in Kalihi Valley. And if that sixth grade teacher had not convinced my parents to put me in a private school, I wouldn't have gotten into Stanford. If I didn't get to Stanford, I wouldn't have met Mike Boych, the guy from Arizona. If I had not met Mike Boych, I would have gotten into Macintosh division. If I had not worked for the Macintosh division, I would not have been visible. If I had not been visible, I would not have been invited to invite Jane Goodall, to interview Jane Goodall. And if I did not interview Jane Goodall, I wouldn't be able to ask her to write my foreword. So all of that comes down to this sixth grade teacher in Kalihi Valley.
Wow. That is maybe like a, 4 decades long sort of like look back and story, but it feels so remarkable in every way. Obviously, with Jane Goodall, writing a foreword for you. I mean, she's the best. And it really puts things in perspective, I think, for a lot of us who are growing our career and leaders as well, just looking at things and maybe sometimes thinking that things doesn't make sense in the moment. What do you tell yourself in those moments when things don't make sense? Because as you said, you could only make sense out of things and you could only connect the dots looking backwards, as what Steve said.
I think the lesson here is that listen, if you get a disease that is not curable and lethal, it's hard to spin that. Although, that woman with ALS has definitely changed many people's lives because one of her goals then became she would complete a marathon in 50 states. So she's completed a marathon in 50 states with ALS. That is a major accomplishment and inspiring. But I'm telling you that, it's very hard to figure out exactly a linear path to success that, you go to the right school, you go to the right college, you get the right internship, and then you go to McKinsey or you go to Goldman Sachs, right? And then, or you go to Morgan Stanley, and then you go to Bain or you go to BCG, and then, you're this huge success. And it's like, I can see the goal and these are the steps. Well, my life is living proof that it doesn't work like that. I quit law school. That I can't tell you that I said to myself, oh God, you should quit law school because that's going to enhance your career. I mean, I thought it was the end of the world when I quit law school. So I guess what I learned and I wrote about in my book is that rather than always being worried about making the right decision, you should make your decision right. So if you quit law school, make that decision the correct decision, right? Oh. And if you get fired, I mean, let's take an extreme example. So let's say, you're on the fast track and you get a job in this really hot startup. It's called Theranos. And Theranos is going to be this company that you take a few drops of your blood, you put this in this magic machine, it does all the diagnostics, and they're raising money from the most famous people, and they got 2 secretaries of state on the board of directors, and the CEOs on the cover of Fortune and Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and everything. And you think, oh my God, I've arrived, right? I work for the hottest startup in Silicon Valley. And then fast forward a few years and the president and the COO are both in jail because Theranos was totally bullshit. It didn't work, right? So they're still in jail right now, right?
Yeah.
And so you think, oh my God, if you looked into my LinkedIn profile, it says Theranos, this 2-year span, and you think, oh my God, I'm tainted with that for the rest of my life. But I'll tell you something. I think if you worked at Theranos and you didn't go to jail, which means that you weren't complicit, you weren't part of the fraud. You tell people, yeah, I worked at Theranos and I learned some very valuable lessons. I learned that, the product really counts.
Yeah.
You got to tell the truth. I also learned that you should not use people as proxies for quality, by which I mean just because a company has 2 secretaries of state and these very famous people on their board of directors, it doesn't mean that their product works, because quite frankly, secretaries of state, they don't know about anything about blood diagnostics, right? So you got to stop using proxies that just because they're secretaries of state or just because this person went to Ivy League school, it doesn't truly mean they're smart or anything. You got to dig deeper. And so I think you learn about all these things about honesty and truth and product development and proxies and when not to believe bullshit. And that would make you a very valuable employee over the course of your life.
So what we're really saying is that, don't try to make the right decisions, but make your decisions right, which I think, and I think that is so, relatable to a lot of people, because there's just, there's a quote that I really love that goes something that along the lines of, when you take a decision, you will never know in your lifetime what the other side of the decision could look like, right? What the other decision could look like. And you just kind of have to, make do with what you have, which, I want to talk a little bit about, and you spoke about your book, Think Remarkable, and I'll talk a little bit about that right now. In this book, Think Remarkable, where you wrote, and led your team to write with you, you share tons of knowledge from more than 40 years of working with game-changing organizations like Apple, Canva, Google, Mercedes, many more. And you also interviewed over 200 leaders, world-changing leaders, and on your Remarkable People podcast with like Jane Goodall, Steve Wozniak, Neil deGrasse Tyson, just tons of amazing people. What have you noticed and learned from these people? Are there any patterns that make them remarkable?
Sure. Well, in a sense, my book, Think Remarkable, is the summation of all the pattern recognition I did, right? So when you interview 200 or 250 remarkable people, patterns definitely do emerge. So at the highest level, the pattern that emerges is that remarkable people go through 3 stages, which is growth, where they believe they can learn new things and they can do new things. And then there's grit, because yes, you now figure you can do new things, but it ain't going to be easy, because by definition, if it's new, it's unlikely you're just going to flip the switch and be good at it. You got to be gritty and persevere. And then the final stage is grace, where you understand that, you are where you are because of a lot of luck and a lot of good fortune and a lot of help by your ohana. And so you owe it to the world to pay back. So at the highest level, it's growth, grit, and grace.
Wow. And, let's touch on each of these topic. And you talk a little bit about growth, right? That the first one, which is the belief that you can learn and the desire to want to learn. I've always been curious, because there are people who obviously are extremely curious about the world. They look at the world differently. Maybe they look at the world in a way that others might not. Do you think that growth is something that can be nurtured, or is something that people are naturally born with?
I mean, listen, I don't have any scientific proof, and I don't know how you would prove or disprove that scientifically, right? I mean, how do you run a scientifically controlled experiment? You take the same kind of people and you foster growth in one set and you foster fixed mindset in the other, and you see what happens, right? I mean, this is not exactly an A/B test of your homepage, but I truly do believe that there's people that have a growth mindset. I took up ice hockey at 44. I took up surfing at
Wow.
60. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
typical. Now, do I believe that everybody could have a growth mindset? Absolutely. Do I believe that everybody does have a growth mindset? No, I don't. A lot of it is because the environment that they're in doesn't foster a growth mindset. If everybody around you is telling you you cannot do this, you should not do this, it's not possible, don't take a risk. I mean, you really have to overcome a lot to go against the grain and embrace a growth mindset. And one of the most difficult parts to overcome a fixed mindset is, believe it or not the externalities, but it's in your head. It's in your head that you cannot be a writer, you cannot be a podcaster, you cannot be an entrepreneur, you cannot be a programmer. So because it's in your head, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I have a recommendation for people who have this problem right now. There's a book called If You Want to Write by Brenda Ueland, Ueland. And this book, it's for writers, but it really applies to almost any kind of vocation or any kind of interest. If you want to make movies, if you want to play the piano, if you want to be a podcaster, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to be, whatever, not just writer, you should read this book. It really, really changed my life, because when I was writing my first book, called The Macintosh Way, I was looking at myself, I was saying, God, you don't have a PhD in English. You've never taken a course in how to write a book or whatever. I mean, you took AP English in high school and you had freshman English at Stanford, but you're hardly a writer. So, can you write a book? And then my wife gave me this book and I read it. And the gist is that Brenda Ueland says, listen, if you want to write, you don't need any permission. You don't need any certification. You don't need any training. If you want to write, just freaking write. And I can apply that to almost anything creative, right? I mean, did you have to go to podcast school to become a podcaster? Did you get a degree in advanced podcasting? I mean, if you want to be a podcaster, freaking get a microphone and turn on the thing and press record. I mean, and so that was a fundamental, sort of change in my life when I read that book.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It seems like a lot of growth mindset is, as you said, is really internal. And obviously it could be challenging if the external factors or the environment doesn't help to nurture that in that sense. But I'm curious, on the topic of growth before we move on to grit, which is, do you think that, what are your thoughts on having a growth mindset environment? Does it bolster your chance of success in life? Does it dramatically increase? So, and I'll give you an example to that question. So, I'm living in Singapore right now. We're known to be a very financial, led hub. People are very academic, but not that innovative compared to Silicon Valley. And so, as a startup being based in Singapore versus in Silicon Valley, the environment are very different. And do you think that changes the possibility of success, the probability of success, the
Absolutely.
environment? Right.
Absolutely. I mean, if I've been to Singapore several times, and I got to tell you, I love your food.
Oh, thank you.
Singapore is Asia for wimps, right? So, but I got to tell you, if you're brought up in a society where failure is, it tarnishes your family for the next 3 generations, right? Like if if you are in a society where the pinnacle of society is you go to work for the government or you go to work in the education, to be a professor, if those are the two things that are the heroes and it's not the entrepreneur, it's going to be very difficult to be an entrepreneur. I mean, you kind of have to go against 2000 years of Asian history, right? To like say, okay, mom and dad, I'm going to start a startup and, the odds are I'm going to fail. And they're going to say, no, 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 son, you go get a degree in dentistry or medicine, or you go work for Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. Don't do something stupid like, start a company. Well, it's kind of hard to overcome that, right?
Wow. That is exactly, I think, how a lot of Singaporeans feel. So from time to time, I am in the Bay Area. So hopefully I'll get to meet you really soon, Guy. Now let's talk a little bit about grit, right? And obviously grit is something that I think Angela Duckworth, talk a lot about, in which you interview her as well. She's the author of the book, literally Grit. Uh, what does grit mean? What does
Well,
grit mean? How does
well,
grit look like?
grit means that you keep going when things are no longer easy or fun. That
Hmm.
that
That's
I
it.
gotta tell you that if you flipped over growth, you'll see grit, because when you try to grow, it's not going to be easy. You have to keep trying. Like, to use
Yeah.
a sports analogy, I've been surfing for 10 years, from 60 to 70. Let me tell you something. The first 8 years, maybe the first 9 years, it
Wow.
was very hard. I mean, you just got to keep going. And I think one of the keys to success that people don't appreciate is you have to just keep showing up.
Wow.
You just have to keep showing up, because most people will not keep showing up. That's the difference. It's not how smart you are, how talented you are. It may be how lucky you are, but I think I think good things happen to people who keep showing up.
Wow. And what is in that factor of someone showing up? Do you think that showing up is something that is lacking these days in people? Do you think that it is sort of like a talent? It is or is it something that we can learn? If it's something that we can learn, how can
Well,
we learn that? Yeah.
listen, I'm a guy with a growth mindset. I think
Yeah.
anything can be learned. Now,
Yeah.
I can't tell you that if I took a piano today, I would be a concert pianist. Okay. I mean, there are
Yeah.
limits, but you're talking to a guy who truly believes in the growth mindset. And so you have to believe that's possible.
Yeah.
And so
It-
people need heroes like that. And, one,
yeah.
one of the great, one of the great effects of Steve Jobs is that people saw that someone who came from a nondescript, not exactly a big deal family, but just a normal family in Cupertino, California, starts the most valuable company in the world. I mean,
Yeah. That's
listen, Steve Jobs wasn't born and raised in Manhattan or Mar-a-Lago, right? I mean, he had a very different upbringing, and I
you
think
know.
you need heroes like that, and and
Yeah.
so that it's possible, and in a sense, like, when I got that ride in a Porsche 911, I had a little bit of a hero. Now, maybe not Steve Jobs
Yeah.
level hero, but I said, you know what? I mean, you don't have to drive a Toyota your whole life, guy. There are other cars you can get. And not that there's anything wrong with Toyota today, but back
Yeah.
then, this is in the 70s, let's just say Toyota in the 70s is not the Toyota of today. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
100%. And by the way, I mean, like you talk about Steve Jobs and like having a hero, and it's I keep his book here with me, right by my desk, and I think there's a couple of books which I think will be interesting. I have Grit. We're talking about Grit, and so this was
yeah, Angela Duckworth.
Angela Duckworth, yeah, in which you interviewed her, and so man, like
If
this.
you have Jobs, Duckworth, and Kawasaki, you're set. You're
Yeah,
set.
I think I know I definitely have a Kawasaki one, but I this is the tool that is right here. Frankly, I have not finished the Jobs one, so it's been like 10 years or so. But this is real interesting story around a Jobs biography because it changed my life. And I picked up that book about when I was 16. I'm 27 right now, so it's like 10 years ago, and and I read this and I had never heard of Cupertino in my life. I've never heard of Palo Alto. I had no idea where California was at 16 years old. All I knew was Taiwan and Bangkok because that's where my family traveled to. And when I read the Steve Jobs biography, one of the things stood out was really just exactly as what you say, that it was this working class family kid, willing to dream a little bit bigger than anyone else around him, and then created one of the most, valuable companies, one of the most legendary products in the world. And then there was a question that started to pop up in my head was, why is it that I'm not able to do the same? Why is it that the people around me are not able to do the same? Maybe we can, but we haven't tried. And so at the age of 16, I decided to kind of embark on this startup journey. I started my first company with my brother, and then 10 years on, I'm still starting this second company, ADP List. And so it's been quite a journey, and I think I would never imagine myself 16 years old. And obviously now I've been to the Bay Area a few times. I visited Steve Jobs kind of like garage, and as you said, like you
Well,
always need this hero figure in your life.
maybe you should move.
This is something that is deeply personal, Guy. But I've been talking to my family about this. And I mean, I'm not married, but I've been talking to my parents about this. They're really supportive, and it's not like I need their permission, but I've been thinking about it. So I'm in the process of it. I mean, people are listening right now, and so yeah, it is personal, but I really want to move there, and that is why I asked you the question about being in Singapore and Silicon Valley, because we're dreaming big. I'm dreaming big, and it's almost a once in a lifetime opportunity to be 27 and be out there in the world.
Well, I
Um,
don't think it's once in a
yeah,
lifetime because you can try multiple times,
yeah,
but there's a reason why people move to Los Angeles to get in the movie business, and they move to Silicon Valley to get into the tech business, and they move to New
yeah.
York to be in the financial business or something right now. Now,
Wow.
having said that, because of high bandwidth now, you can really start a company anywhere. You don't have
Yeah,
to be in Silicon Valley to be a tech company. And I
yeah,
could build the case that there are some advantages to not being in Silicon Valley because you're not competing as much for talent, for engineering talent in
right.
particular. But I
Wow.
just want to point out to you one of the ironies of this issue of Singapore, which is, to
Please
me,
tell.
Singapore, which I don't know, it's not even 100 years old yet, right? I mean,
It's 59. It's 59 in about a month. Yeah, it's
okay.
59
So
years.
it's 60 years old, right? So
Yeah,
Singapore is a startup, right? Like 61
it
years
is.
ago there was no Singapore. Now
Yep.
there is, and so Singapore is a startup country. So you would think in a startup country, Lee Kuan Yew is your Steve Jobs, right? So you would
Oh,
think that,
he is. Boy, he is.
right. So if Lee Kuan Yew can do a startup, like why should everybody else in Singapore not want to do a startup? You are a startup. What the
We are.
hell?
We are. It's so interesting that you say that. And by the way, I love just how this is becoming such a raw conversation, because because my closest friends know this, and my family knows this. I look up to Lee Kuan Yew a lot, and one of the biggest reasons why I'm still in Singapore is because I love, and I'm not even kidding, I love visiting the museum in which it showcases Singapore's history. And many of people that might be listening to this might not appreciate it to the extent, but Singapore was transformed from a third world country 60 years ago to one of the richest country in the world today. Uh, and just and we have only a 6 million population size. And so if you think about that, it's remarkable in every sense. I mean, it's one of the safest country, one of the highest GDP as well per capita, and it's and as you said, like Lee Kuan Yew is our Steve Jobs, and I think this place reminds me of that fond history. But I always love a quote that he says, which also pushes me out of Singapore, which is, go chase the rainbow.
Well, you know what?
Yeah,
Not that I'm an expert in these things, but it
yeah, go
seems
for
to
it.
me that maybe Lee Kuan Yew did too good a job, and he made Singapore so successful so fast that people didn't have to try and be desperate and be gritty, right?
Oh,
They,
yeah.
they, they weren't pushed. Like, if you want to look at a country that is really, really entrepreneurial, look at Vietnam or Israel, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, Israel.
Vietnam is like this war. Israel is this war. And I think that, economic hardship actually fosters entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
You could make the same case about Hawaii, right? Hawaii, like beautiful weather, you got the ohana, you got the aloha spirit, like, you know, like
yeah. No,
just
I
relax, bro. Just take it easy. Enjoy life. We live in Hawaii, right?
that is so true. I often ask myself, the question as well, which is, and I think Lee Kuan Yew did such a phenomenal job that it made Singapore so comfortable. You don't have to think about the housing, you don't have to think about
Yeah.
your education, you don't have to think about anything. Just show up to school, just get a job, and you're set.
You, and you're
And
set for life, right?
you are set for life. Exactly. I mean, where else in the world where government would subsidize you when you get married to buy your first housing. I mean, people hearing this might be shocked, but Singapore actually provides that. So if you graduate and you get married as young as possible, they actually give you subsidies to buy your housing, and these subsidies are in the tens of thousands. You know, they pay off some of the housing loans for you, and it's just incredible that they have these grants, and it almost made life seems a little bit too comfortable sometimes for our own good. So you know about that. But touching about this, I mean, talking about cities and countries. I mean, you have been in the Bay Area, you have been a part of these big companies. What makes these companies so exceptional? What makes that environment so exceptional for innovative companies like Apple that you've been a part of as well?
Well, I think the origin of this is Stanford. You know, the engineering program of Stanford, where there were a bunch of geeks and a bunch of nerds who had this idea about making oscilloscopes or making antennas or making chips or whatever. And then, so it started with Stanford, and then, you know, the offshoot of these first generation companies, eventually it leads to Apple, and then Apple leads to Google, and Google leads to, you know, whatever. And it becomes a place where, well, entrepreneurship is really worshipped, right? I mean, there are plenty many times in Silicon Valley, you know, you say to somebody, I've worked for a company for 25 years. In many places of the world, people would say, wow, you're really successful, you're really stable. There's a part of Silicon Valley that some people would be thinking, wow, what's wrong with you? You only stayed at one company for 25 years. What's wrong with you? I mean, don't you have any ambition? I think it's a very different perspective. And in Silicon Valley, failure is okay. You know, and maybe in Singapore, if you fail, you gotta, you know, like your family history is tainted for the next 100 years. But in Silicon Valley, it's like your reputation is tainted for the next 100 days. I mean, it's a very different world.
Wow.
No, don't
And
get me wrong. It's not all, you know, it's not
yeah,
all
but
just butterflies and pixie dust and unicorns. I mean,
yeah,
there's some bad sides to Silicon Valley too, but
there are.
the acceptance of failure and the willingness to try and the seeing the world as a glass half full, not half empty. That's
Wow.
all Silicon Valley traits.
Well, you know, I spent some time there, maybe a few months, like in 2021, and I feel exactly what you say, which is, you know, just the people there kind of have this worldview of that the glass is half full and not half empty, and it really inspires you to want to do more. I think there is a power in it that it doesn't make you feel like you're not good enough. In fact, it makes you want to try harder, which I think in some cases in Singapore, if you look at people that come back from Stanford or from Harvard, you feel like, okay, they're better than me, so maybe I'm not good enough. But if you're there, you know, it almost feel like you don't feel the sense of you're not good enough. It feels like, okay, you know, they inspire me. I want to try harder because there's a sense of they want to help you. And I think this culture of giving back to the community and to the people around them. It feels so Silicon Valley, at least from my point of view. So thanks for sharing that, Guy. I mean, a lot of people here, by the way, I think want to hear sort of your time at Apple, and I know that you're at Canva right now, and you have worked with Steve Jobs and Macintosh. And by the way, I mean, I'm still halfway through this book. I know that he got fired and Macintosh and everything, but what did you learn, you know, working with Steve and at Apple in such a transformative time?
Well, you know, listen, working for Steve Jobs was difficult because he's a very challenging perspective. He is very perfectionist, and he would not hesitate to just tell you off in public and, you know, rip you to shreds in public. So it was a very scary experience. But I'll tell you something, I am where I am because of Steve Jobs, and I am where I am because of the stress he caused in me. I have no regrets about that. And I think it's an honor, but certainly was not a pleasure to work for him. So, you know, that's I owe a lot to him. And it was a great experience. I learned so much about product development and about evangelism and about making people believe in your dream as much as you do. I mean, it was a great experience. I wish everybody could work for an Apple once in their life. It's life changing.
What is it that makes, you know, Steve Jobs, you think?
That may be above my pay grade. I mean, I think hundreds, if not thousands, of people have tried to figure that out. But
Wow.
he was just driven. He is what I call a mission-driven asshole. So there are two kinds of assholes, right? So one asshole is ego-driven. It's all about me and glorification of me. And another kind of asshole is just on a mission to get something accomplished. And Steve Jobs' mission was to make the best personal computer. And if you got in the way of that goal, you got run over. I mean, that's just how it was. And
Wow.
I think a mission-driven asshole can have an amazing, amazing kind of results. But
Wow.
I don't want people listening to this to conclude that, oh, what Guy is saying is you have to be an asshole to succeed, because I don't think that's true. And I give you as living proof of that, Melanie Perkins, the CEO of Canva, is not at all an asshole. I mean, she's a wonderful person. So you don't have to be an asshole. But if you're going to be an asshole, be a mission-driven asshole.
Wow, that is, I have no comments on that, but that is an advice well taken, at least by me. So thanks for sharing that. I mean, before we talk about Canva and Melanie Perkins, you talk about, obviously mission driven assholes and ego driven assholes. I think I heard somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but you mentioned that even if Elon Musk wants to come onto your podcast, you wouldn't entertain that. Am I wrong to say that? Did I hear that somewhere?
That is an interesting question. First of all, I don't think Elon Musk even knows who I am. So it's not like he's like, oh, if I could only get on Guy's podcast, he probably doesn't know who I am or doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
But I said that remarkable people towards the end of their career, they have this revelation that they need to pay back society, and they need to give back, and they need to help the next generation. And it's called grace, and it's called graciousness, right? And at this point, I see zero evidence of grace or graciousness in Elon Musk. I mean, I don't understand him at all. Like, in my humble opinion, he could have gone down as maybe the most innovative thinker in all of history, right? Because Steve Jobs, which is, many people consider him the most innovative person. But Steve Jobs, he was in one particular area, which is personal computers and iPhones, iPods, iPads, but in devices, right? Now, Elon Musk, he did electric cars. He does satellite internet service. He does space travel. He does tunnels. He does chips. He's in so many different areas. You could say, wow, he's like 5 Steve Jobs, but then this whole thing about buying Twitter, and this whole thing about supporting white nationalism, and this whole thing about supporting all this kind of stuff is just, it's just, I don't understand what happened there. Not at all. So, wow. I mean, listen, Elon, if you're hearing this and you want to be on my podcast, I honestly don't know if I would take him. I mean, it would be, to say to people that Elon Musk is on your podcast, that is a big deal, right? I mean, a lot of people would be interested in him, and I don't know. I mean, it feels like I would be changing my standards if I had him. I think the people who admire him, they admire him for the money he has made. But, my podcast is called Remarkable People, not rich people, not famous people. I don't have any like hedge fund managers. I don't have any private equity, CEOs on my podcast. The only one in that industry that I would consider is, if Warren Buffett called me up and said, I want to be on your podcast, I would freaking fly to Nebraska to do that, right? But if you're a random, billionaire hedge fund manager called me up or asked me and said, I'm worth, $10 billion and I want to be on your podcast, I would say, you're not remarkable. You're just rich.
Wow. That is quite a way to look at this, because, everyone has such a, I mean, Elon is probably one of the most consequential people in our time, and obviously, and
Yes.
I think the influence that he has on the younger generations, and the way I think they they just behave as well. I think he probably has a lot of influence on people. I think especially how people behave in the tech industry as well. And I probably a little bit of like how Steve Jobs has sort of inspired this idea that you got to be an asshole to get things done. Elon might have inspired something else. I probably did not catch the whole ideology of what he's after, but thanks for sharing those, guy, which I think is really incredible. And now I want to talk a little bit about Nice People, which is the CEO that you're working with right now, Melanie Perkins, from Canva. How do you both meet? How do you end up at Canva? They are an Australian company. I just
Yeah.
visited their Melbourne's office. I met, Mark. I met Andrew Green, who is the head of design there.
Yeah.
Just amazing team and culture. How did you end up, with an Australian company all the way from
Well,
US?
this is another good story about you just cannot predict what's going to happen. So,
Please tell
so
us.
really, I can trace the way I got my position at Canva was because I became very active on Twitter. And on Twitter, I believe that every tweet should have a picture or a video in order to stand out from the pure text tweets. And I was working with a woman named Peg Fitzpatrick. So she had to make graphics for all my tweets. And, she was actually tweeting a lot as me. And so one day, Cliff Olbrich, who's the co-founder, reaches out via Twitter and says, Guy, we noticed that you're using our product Canva to make your graphics. We're coming to the United States soon. Would you like to get together? Maybe we can talk about doing something together. And to tell you the truth, I went to Peggy. I said, Peggy, isn't Canva the thing you use? She goes, yeah. I said, do you like it? She goes, yeah. I said, do you think I should help that company? She said, yeah, you probably should. They're really good product. So that was my due diligence, and that was how I came to go to work for Canva. It's not like I was doing this extensive search looking for this company that had a world-class product and a world-class market with a world-class team. It was like I was using their product. They reached out to me. I asked Peg, should I help them? She said, yes. Okay, that's it.
Wow. So it's sort of like a series of coincidence. And what was the first meeting like with Cliff and with Melanie? What was the first sort of
the first meeting was at my house, and they showed me Canva, and what I loved about Canva instantly is that if you are at all familiar with Photoshop, when Photoshop, they give you this window, and this window is surrounded by about 200 icons and 200 little things. You got to figure out, what the hell does this little pencil do? What does this brush do? What does this, what does all these tools do? But with Canva, they have this concept that there are certain design types like Instagram or Twitter or 16:9 presentations or Etsy stores or, whatever, right? And so they have all these design types. And then within each design type, there are hundreds of templates that are pre-done. And then you just customize the text or you change the graphics a little and you're done. And I tell people you can complete a design in Canva faster than you can install Photoshop. And so, I instantly fell in love with the concept that, this is kind of Canva is to design what Macintosh was to personal computing. So I fell in love instantly.
Wow.
And I said, there's a lot of people who are not professional designers who will use Canva to make graphics. And at the time, social media was taking off, so there was a much greater need for graphics.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I know that Canva recently had a Canva Create conference in LA, and that was amazing.
Were you there?
No, I wasn't there. I really wish I was. I saw so many tweets about it, and I was like, man, I should be there. And I know that recently, Figma has a config as well, and tons of designers were there. Obviously, I think, to be honest, I think probably like a lot of the people listening right now uses Figma more than Canva, just because they are product designers. So, by the way, Guy, this is a great time for you to just evangelize the heck out of Canva.
Wait, did the acquisition go through?
no, that the acquisition did not go through.
Uh,
So yeah, I think it was due to legal issues, and so it did not go through. So yeah, Figma is now on their own in that sense, and I see that, Canva, from an external perspective, Canva is sort of deepening its relations and roots into the United States, which is a really interesting move. How do you make of Canva's future as someone who has been there for so many years, almost since the early days? Like,
well,
what have you
I
thought?
gotta tell you that I have been associated with a lot of great companies, and I don't know of any company that has a greater dedication to doing everything well. I mean, there are companies that do engineering well, but their marketing sucks. And there are companies that do great marketing, but their product sucks. But
Yeah.
Canva, I mean, everybody on that team, they want to do, whether it's onboarding or designing templates or, the iOS app or the Android app, everybody there is really a perfectionist. I've never seen that happen. I mean, more so than Apple.
Wow.
It's
That
really
is a big
incredible.
statement. That is a big statement to say that more so than Apple. Like, why do you think that happened in Canva? Is it a hiring? Is it, why is it happening at Canva?
I think it's Melanie Perkins' desire to do an absolutely remarkable job. I think it's Melanie.
Wow. Melanie, I think I've not seen her speak at a lot of conferences, at least the one that I've been at. Uh, and I'm sure a lot of people here who uses Canva have not met Melanie as well. They have met Dylan Field. They have not met Melanie Perkins. I've heard so much great stories about Melanie, but from someone who have not met her yet, what can we learn from her?
Well, you can learn from her several things. One is perseverance, because when she was trying to fund Canva 10 years ago, she got rejected about 300 times, right? So, I mean, how many of you would try pitching a company 300 times or 299 times and not give up? So that's number one. Number two, I think that she really has surrounded herself with people who are better at doing their jobs than her. And there are many organizations, where the CEO or the CXOs, they always like to be the best at the thing, right? So if you're the CEO, you want to be the best at finance, best at marketing, best at operations, best at PR, best at everything. But I think when you look around Canva, you say, wow, this person is better than anybody,
Wow. And it
including Melanie, at doing their job.
wow, that is just something that I think a lot of CEO has learned, myself as well. It's always easy to kind of feel and think that you might be doing something better than the rest, but I kind of got schooled by one of our investors recently, and he was telling me, they're Sequoia Capital India, and now known as Pick 15. They're one of our investors, and the partner was telling me, "Hey Felix, you really got to start hiring people for this specific department because you're so involved in it." And I was like, "Boy, yes, I probably spend about 80% of my time on that right now." And by the way, that's marketing. So if any marketing people right now wants to come into ADP list, we're hiring. But it's so true. I mean, there's so much things like surround yourself with really good people, and I think this is something that resonated with me a lot. So thanks for sharing. And Guy, I know we're closing towards the end of today's conversation, but there's two questions that I really want to ask you. I think it's really about sort of the way you look at the world, and I mean life so far as well as you have experienced. But what is one thing, and I'm curious, what is something or one thing that used to be important to you when you were younger and no longer matters right now as you kind of age in life?
Um, I wish I could tell you it was cars, but I still love cars.
Some things remain the same.
um,
Yeah.
Let me see. I could tell you this is a slightly different way to answer the
Yeah.
question, but um, money, short-term money, is not that important to me anymore, and that's a function of I've done well enough so that I don't need money to live the rest of my life. That's one aspect. But the also thing is, I've also come to the insight that Guy, you're 70 years old, you ain't gonna live too much longer, so you got to make a choice. at the end of my life, I don't want to. I don't want to be able. I don't want to be saying to myself, guy, like, if only you had taken more business trips, or if only you had done more interviews, or if only you had, started more companies, you would be happy. I don't think I'm going to be saying that. I'm going to be saying that, guy, you should have spent more time with your family. So in order to prevent this from happening, I'm spending time with my family, and I turned down almost every request for travel. I used to travel 60 times a year. And now it takes an act of God for me to make an in-person speech. And so if you're out there and you want me to speak for you personally, I mean, in person, you better come with a freaking boatload of money, man, because I ain't doing it.
Well, I can either come with a boatload of money, or I can just fly your entire family to Singapore for a holiday, hopefully. Hopefully they can enjoy Singapore as well.
Is it a private jet?
Oh God,
Although Singapore Airlines is, it's hard to
beat.
Singapore Airlines is right up there, man.
It's our baby. It's our babies. I mean, I do have one last question, but then I kind of want to ask you one question. I mean, have you ever thought about retiring, or just stepping back from more of active work and just spend more time with the family?
Is that what I want to do?
Is that something that has come across your mind? Is that on a table?
Every day? And you know what? In my mind, I am semi-retired. Basically, I focus on podcasting, family, and surfing.
Wow, that is amazing.
I surfed this morning. And I got, you may not believe this, but when I schedule a podcast appearance like this or a meeting, the timing is picked by the tide in Santa Cruz, because where I surf, you want to surf at low tide. So right now it's kind of high tide. That's why we're doing this interview. If it was low tide, we would be doing this at a different time.
Thank God for the high tide right now. By the way, it's 1:40 a.m. where I'm at, so I'm glad I'm meeting you at a high tide timing as well. So the guy, I really appreciate this. And
you're telling me that 3,000 people were listening at 1:40 a.m.?
No, so majority of our audience are actually from North America, so that's a good thing.
Oh, okay.
That is why we even scheduled it at this time, because we wanted to cater for more of our audience in the US and Canada. That is where
I hope they're not surfers.
Yes. And one last question. I mean, in a sense, two more questions. I mean, one is,
oh my God, every time you say there's two more questions, you say there's two more questions. It's been six questions.
I promise
already.
you, this is something that I feel obligated to ask, because a lot of people do ask me for my personal opinion, but then I thought you'd probably be the best person to answer this. There is so much talks on the streets, word on the streets, that Canva is going after Adobe's launch, going after Photoshop, going after everything on Adobe's plate. Would they one day be, maybe, I don't know, doing what Figma is doing? Is that something that could happen?
When you say doing what Figma is doing, what do you mean? You mean trying to sell yourself to Adobe and it blows up? No, we're not interested in that.
Okay, I think we'll end that question there. I mean, it's an interesting one, just because a lot of designers, I'm sort of like a UI UX product designer, and just tons of people don't use Figma because they don't use Canva because they use Figma. And I think Canva is going after a much more pro sort of strategy right now.
We just bought a company for that.
Exactly. Affinity, I think. And so is that a longer roadmap, you think? I don't know if there's something you can review.
I would just generally say that if any graphic in the world is produced, we want Canva to produce it.
All right. I think we got the answer. I think, guys, we got the answer for this morning and afternoon. So all of you can broadcast online that, that is that. But Guy, last question, which is, if you were to...
You promise this is the last question.
I swear on my life. It's 2 a.m. by the way. I got to go to bed as well. We have a big ADP List event tomorrow in Singapore's National Design Center. So I'm really excited about that. But I'm curious, if you kind of put your wise hat on, which you've been doing, and you have to advise young people listening to this on building a life or a career that they can be proud of, what is that one advice that you would give them?
Well, the one advice I would give you is that if you're young right now, you're going to have a very long life, right? So chillax. You don't have to optimize every decision. And when you make your decisions, just focus on making that decision right. Don't belabor, don't make yourself crazy trying to find the perfect decision. Just make a decision and then make it right.
Wow. Thank you so much for this, Guy. I really enjoyed my time with you. This interview felt so authentic. It felt so raw. And, I came in here feeling nervous because I've watched so much of your videos. And just, when I was 16, you were one of the first video I watched alongside Steve Jobs. And so, thank you so much for making this so comfortable.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. You take care. And, in case, obviously, I think people should, buy the book, but I want to, I'm going to give you this link to a Canva course about how to be remarkable. That's free in case you don't have the book or you don't like to read books. So that is a free Canva course that Canva and I created on how to be remarkable.
Perfect. So
okay.
So our team is gonna send.
All right, everybody, go to sleep now.
Yeah, I know they're gonna start their day. Please don't tell them to go to sleep. I'm gonna go to
start their day. Either one. Yeah.
Guy, thank you so much. I really hope to see you in person.
You're very welcome.
When I go to the US, and thanks for all the advice. I think a lot of them felt personal, especially when the part where you say, "Then move."
Okay, you take care.
Thank you so much, Guy.
Bye bye.
See you.